The frontier had already taken everything from him: his past, his name, and his innocence. Now it would demand something even greater. Betrayal, bloodshed, and the brutal hand of fate would shape Simon Kenton's next chapter. But would he become the hunter or the hunted? The wilderness was ruthless. It demanded strength, cunning, and a will as unbreakable as the steel of a flintlock. Simon Kenton had learned that lesson when he left behind the name of his past, fleeing into the unknown under the alias Simon Butler. He had fought the land, fought the wild, and fought the men who sought to take what wasn't theirs. But nothing could prepare him for what came next. In November 1771, Simon and his companions, George Strader and John Yeager, set out with one goal: to reach the Kentucky lands. They had heard of its untouched beauty, its fertile hunting grounds, and the wealth that could be made from fur trapping. But reaching Kentucky was no easy task. It was a land contested by settlers, native tribes, and fortune seekers, a place where men vanished without a trace. And before long, Simon Kenton would find himself naked, wounded, and running for his life through a freezing, rain-soaked wilderness, hunted by men who had no mercy. The hunt for wealth in the great Kanawha. When Simon Kenton, George Strader, and John Yeager first set out, their goal was clear: to reach the Kentucky lands, the fabled Kentucky canelands, a paradise of rich soil, endless game, and the promise of prosperity. However, locating it was more difficult than the tale suggested. Despite weeks of searching, they failed to find the legendary lands, lost in the uncharted wilderness with no clear path forward. The disappointment weighed on them, but survival came first. Forced to abandon their dream, at least for the time being, they shifted their focus to what was in front of them: the fertile trapping grounds of the Kanawha River. What had begun as failure turned into something else entirely. They had found a place where they could live, work, and, if they were smart, prosper. Settling in for a long winter, the three men established their camp along the Kanawha River near the mouth of the Elk, each taking on a specific role that allowed them to function like a well-oiled machine. Simon Kenton, the best hunter and tracker among them, scouted the country up the Kanawha, regularly running his trap line on both sides of the river. George Strader, improving as a woodsman but still lacking Simon's instinct for reading the land, worked downstream from the mouth of the Elk, covering the lower territory. John Yeager, older and struggling with the physical demands of trapping, remained in camp where he cooked, prepared hides, and maintained their base. It was a good arrangement, one that minimized disputes and allowed them to thrive. To make their work easier, they had built 2 small canoes, one for Simon to cross the Kanawha upstream, and another for Strader as he worked downstream. Winter had been kind to Simon and his 2 companions. The great Kanawha region had rewarded them well. Thick pelts of beaver, otter, mink, and black bear stacked in their canoes, enough to trade for powder, lead, and the tools of survival. But with fortune came risk, and to keep trapping, they needed supplies. That meant paddling against the current, a brutal journey back to civilization at Provence settlement. They had been postponing the trip, but months later, it was time for a long and arduous trip upriver to trade their bounty of pelts. It was April 1772 when they set off. One canoe was carefully hidden in the woods, while the other, packed with furs, food, and supplies, was secured to their larger canoe with braided rawhide. Even with the Kanawha's spring-freshened current pushing them along, the journey was not easy. It took 2 full days to reach the Ohio River, and by nightfall, they set up camp at the triangular point of land where the Kanawha met the Ohio, knowing they would need their rest before the grueling upstream journey ahead. It was on that journey that fate intervened. A massive canoe, far larger than anything Simon had seen before, drifted toward their camp. Inside, 10 muscular Shawnee warriors sat poised, their expressions unreadable. At the bow stood a tall, dark-bearded white man, his voice calm but commanding. Peter Loramie, a French trader with influence among the Shawnee, greeted them with open arms. But behind his smile, there was something else. A watchfulness, a calculation. Loramie was offering trade, but Simon felt the weight of eyes on him. He had learned to trust his instincts, and something about a few of the younger warriors set his nerves on edge. The men exchanged furs for supplies, an iron kettle thrown in as a symbol of friendship. But as the Frenchman's canoe disappeared downstream, Simon made a fateful decision. They needed to leave, immediately. "I didn't like the look of a few of them," Simon muttered to his companions. "Best we don't let them know where we sleep." They quickly pushed off, doubling back up the river under the cover of night. It would be the last moment of peace Simon Kenton would know for a long time. The ambush in the night. Winter turned to spring, and with it came the rain. It soaked the hills and valleys, turned the ground into thick mud, and slowed every step. Simon and George Strader ran their traplines together now, wary after the encounter with Loramie. Each morning, they trudged through the woods, hoping for a fresh kill, dreading what might be waiting for them instead. On a miserable, rain-drenched evening in March 1773, they returned to camp, cold and exhausted. They quickly stripped out of their rain-drenched clothes, hanging them to dry near the fire, and then wrapped blankets around their shoulders. As they sat by the fire, John Yeager, their aging companion, was already plucking a turkey Simon had shot earlier that day. The warmth of the flames felt like salvation. Then, a noise in the darkness. Simon barely had time to register it before he saw them. 6 Shawnee warriors, their faces shadowed by the fire's glow, rifles raised. Before he could shout, a gun cracked. Yeager staggered forward, hands clutching his chest. Blood seeped through his fingers as he collapsed into the firelight, his mouth opening in shock but unable to form words. "Meet at the bear trap," Simon bellowed, his instincts overriding his fear. The camp exploded into chaos. Strader leapt for the trees, losing his blanket as he ran. Simon dove into the darkness, his bare feet slapping against the cold, wet earth. Behind him, he heard the sickening crunch of a tomahawk sinking into Yeager's skull. He didn't look back. He ran. A naked man's fight to survive. Simon ran through the woods like a wounded animal, his breath ragged, his feet bleeding from jagged stones and fallen branches. The rain was his only mercy, washing away his tracks, hiding his scent. For miles he ran, naked and shivering, branches slashing his skin, hunger gnawing at his stomach. When he finally stopped, the reality of his situation hit him like a hammer. No weapons, no food, no clothes. The only chance of survival lay in reaching the Ohio River. If he could make it there, he might find help. If not, he would die in these woods, just another nameless soul lost to the wilderness. For 6 days, Simon and Strader staggered through the wilderness, half dead from starvation, their bodies bruised and broken. Every step was agony, but the drive to live kept them moving. Then, a miracle. As they stumbled onto a gravelly beach along the Ohio River, Simon's blurred vision caught something impossible. Canoes pulled ashore, smoke curling from a campfire. White men. Strader collapsed on the spot. Simon barely had time to take another step before a towering man rushed forward, catching him just as he fell unconscious. The world spun. Darkness swallowed him whole. The last thing he heard was a voice, gruff but familiar. "We know Simon Butler very well," Jacob Greathouse muttered, a smirk in his voice. "I think pretty soon everybody knows him." Simon recovers and prepares for his next chapter. March 25th, 1773. Simon and Strader recover at Briscoe's settlement, where Simon, in exchange for work, earns a new flintlock and tomahawk, essential tools for survival in the unforgiving wilderness. The experience hardens him further. reinforcing that self-reliance is the only path to survival on the frontier. Strutter, shaken by the brutal attack and near-death experience, makes a decision that Simon cannot. He chooses to return east, away from the lawless dangers of the frontier. With a final farewell, the two part ways, leaving Simon once again alone. But Simon does not retreat. Instead, he joins a surveying team, guiding them through Kentucky's untamed wilderness, eager to prove himself, determined to carve out his place in the land he nearly died trying to reach. A lone white man walks into a Shawnee village, May 18th, 1773. As Simon explores the frontier, another man takes a far more daring approach. Thomas Bullitt, a bold land surveyor, shocks the Shawnee village of Chillicothe by walking in alone, unarmed, and carrying a white flag, an act that could easily have led to his death. Instead, he is led before Chief Blackfish, the powerful Shawnee leader. Bullitt presents his case. He seeks permission for white settlers to live south of the Ohio River, promising they will not interfere with Shawnee lands. His confidence is unmatched, but Blackfish remains skeptical. The chief listens, but warns that the Shawnee will not tolerate settlers disturbing their sacred hunting lands. He speaks of the ghostly spirits of the ancient Asgen people who still haunt Kentucky, a reminder that the land itself carries a deeper, untold history. The Shawnee will not give it up easily. This tense negotiation sets the stage for future conflict as white settlers continue to push westward and the Shawnee prepare to defend what has always been theirs. The murder that starts a war. April 30th to May 1st, 1774. Tensions between settlers and native tribes had always simmered beneath the surface. But on April 30th, 1774, the flames of war were truly ignited. Near Yellow Creek, a group of frontiersmen led by Jacob Greathouse carried out a massacre that would change everything. A group of Mingos, including the family of Chief Logan, had come in peace, expecting a trade exchange. Instead, they were slaughtered without warning, and their bodies were left as a grim message. Among the dead were Logan's sister, her unborn child, and his closest kin. Logan had always been a respected native leader, one of the few who had long sought peace with settlers. But this act of brutality shattered any hopes of diplomacy. With grief twisting into rage, Logan swore vengeance, vowing to take 10 white lives for every Mingo slain. The murder of Logan's family sent shockwaves across the frontier. Lord Dunmore, governor of Virginia, saw the rising storm and began preparing for war. He ordered the militia to mobilize against the Shawnee, setting in motion the events that would become known as Dunmore's War. Meanwhile, Simon Kenton, now fully embracing the frontier life as Simon Butler, arrived in Pittsburgh. There, he met a man who would become one of his closest allies, Simon Girty, a rugged frontier interpreter with deep knowledge of native tribes. Their fates would soon be intertwined. Simon Butler joins Dunmore's War, June-October 1774. The frontier was on the brink of war, and Lord Dunmore wasted no time assembling his forces. By the summer of 1774, he had raised an army of 3,000 men, determined to march against the Shawnee and secure control over the disputed lands. Among those who enlisted was Simon Butler. With his reputation growing, he quickly stood out as one of the best scouts in the militia. His ability to navigate dense forests, track movements, and disappear into the wild made him invaluable to the war effort. During this time, he grew close to Simon Girty, the tough and unpredictable frontier interpreter. The two became blood brothers, swearing to protect each other for life. Together, they served as messengers, slipping between battle lines, carrying dangerous reports across hostile lands. The final battle approached, and Simon Kenton was about to witness his first true war. Simon Kenton had survived one of the harshest trials of his life, but the frontier wasn't done with him yet. New allies, old enemies, and a war brewing on the horizon would push him further than he'd ever imagined. Would he finally find his place in this brutal new world? Find out in Episode 3. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for the next chapter in the incredible tale of Simon Kenton. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.